The Galactic Council chamber was massive, a towering hall filled with the most powerful beings in the known universe. Representatives from hundreds of species sat in their designated seats, murmuring among themselves as the debate dragged on. At the center of it all stood Elias Cade, the human ambassador. His face was calm, unreadable. He had been here many times before, making the same arguments, delivering the same warnings. Every time, the response was the same: mockery, dismissal, and empty promises. The Varnak diplomat, a creature with hardened crimson scales, leaned forward, his voice dripping with amusement. Humans and their complaints, always whining about fairness, justice, and honor. Do you think the universe cares about your morals? A few others chuckled. A Rilnari representative, her 4 eyes gleaming with disdain, waved a clawed hand. You should be grateful. We allowed you a seat at this table, did we not? Know your place, human. Cade didn't react. He had expected this. Humanity had endured insults like this for centuries, being used, betrayed, forced into unfair treaties. Their colonies plundered while they were told it was for the greater balance of power. Every time, humans chose diplomacy. Every time, they swallowed their anger. Not this time. He let the silence stretch long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then, in a voice colder than the void itself, he spoke. This is your last chance. The chamber fell quiet. It wasn't the words that unsettled them. It was the way he said them. No frustration, no desperation, just a simple statement. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The council erupted in laughter behind him. Arrogant, self-assured. Humans had always been patient. What could possibly change now? That was the last time they ever laughed at humanity. The first sign came 3 days later. A cargo fleet belonging to the powerful Xelari Dominion vanished. No distress signals, no wreckage, simply gone. At first, the Dominion assumed it was a navigation error, perhaps pirates. But when they sent warships to investigate, those ships vanished too. Similar reports started surfacing across the galaxy. An outpost near the Orion Rift, silent. A mining colony in the Zithar sector, empty. Entire convoys disappeared without a trace. The council dismissed the rumors. Space was dangerous after all. Accidents happened, raids happened, but something was different this time. Every disappearance had one thing in common. Humans. Every ship, every station, every world that went silent had been involved in humanity's mistreatment. The corporations that had exploited Earth's resources, the empires that had enforced one-sided trade agreements, the mercenary fleets that had once burned human colonies for profit. One by one, they were being erased. Panic spread. The council called for an emergency meeting, but this time, the human representative did not attend. The hollow requests were ignored. The envoys sent to Earth never returned. Then, the first message came. It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't a demand. It was just 2 words broadcasted across every channel in every language known to the galaxy. We warned you. It was then that the galaxy understood something terrifying. Humanity's patience had finally snapped. The Galactic Council was in chaos. The chamber, once a place of long-winded speeches and political maneuvering, now echoed with fear. Murmurs filled the room as delegates argued, voices rising, accusing, demanding answers. Entire fleets had gone silent. No distress signals, no wreckage, no survivors. Trade routes that had been safe for centuries had become death traps. Powerful empires were losing ships, stations, and colonies, and no one knew how or why. Except, deep down, they did. The humans. For centuries, humanity had been the overlooked species, the ones forced into disadvantageous treaties, the ones who always chose peace no matter how often they were betrayed. But now their silence was more terrifying than any war fleet. A Varnak general slammed his armored fist onto the table, his yellow eyes burning with fury. We must demand answers. Earth must explain these disappearances. The Rilnari diplomat, usually so smug, looked pale. We have already sent envoys to their homeworld. The room fell silent, and the general pressed. The Rilnari hesitated, then exhaled. They never returned. A cold wave swept through the chamber. The Falsha representative, whose species had built its wealth by exploiting human colonies, spoke next. His voice was quieter than usual. We are dealing with an unknown force. It could be. A deep, synthetic chime interrupted him. The council's main display flickered to life. A single message appeared. We warned you. No threats, no commands, just those same 2 words. Then the stars began to go dark. Every screen, every galactic map in the room showed the same terrifying pattern. Regions controlled by the most powerful empires were being erased. as if something was swallowing them whole. Trade routes flickered offline. Hyperlanes, once bustling with activity, became voids of silence. Someone gasped, "What? What is happening?" The answer came faster than anyone expected. A desperate distress signal burst through the emergency frequency, projected in real time. The image of a auxiliary battleship, one of the most advanced war machines in the galaxy, filled the screen. The bridge was in chaos, officers shouting, alarms blaring, weapons firing at nothing. The captain, a hardened veteran, looked directly into the camera, sweat beading on his scaled face. "They're here," he panted. "They came out of nowhere. No warnings, no negotiations. We don't even know what we're fighting." The signal cut to static. The council chamber was dead silent. For the first time in history, the galaxy realized what it had done. They had mistaken humanity's patience for weakness. And now they were learning how wrong they had been. Fear spread like wildfire. The Galactic Council, once an arena of politics and power struggles, had become a place of whispers and trembling voices. The disappearances were no longer isolated events. Entire systems had gone dark. Empires that had stood for centuries found themselves crippled overnight. And still, no one had seen the enemy. Survivors from the edges of the silent zones spoke of shadows moving in the void, ships that appeared without warning and struck without mercy. They called it the Phantom Armada. No known records existed of these warships. No council databases identified their make, their technology, their origins. And yet, those who encountered them did not return. The only evidence of their existence was the eerie silence left in their wake. The Galactic Council convened once more, fear breaking through their usual arrogance. The Thalsha representative, his violet skin paler than usual, clenched his jaw. "We must unify. We must stand together to stop this madness." The Varnak general growled. "Against what? Ghost stories? No enemy has even shown itself." The Rilnari diplomat, once smug and dismissive, now spoke in a hushed voice. "Perhaps we should negotiate." A scoff came from the back of the room. All eyes turned as a new figure entered. Elias Cade. The human ambassador walked in with slow, deliberate steps, his face unreadable. The silence in the chamber was absolute. "You wish to negotiate," Cade said, his voice steady. "Interesting. Humanity once asked for negotiations too." The Varnak general tensed. "You think this is you? The disappearances? The attacks? You'll expect us to believe that humans?" Cade raised a hand. The chamber's main display flickered to life, revealing something they had never seen before. A recording. The image showed an elite alien station, one of the most heavily defended outposts in the galaxy. Ships hovered around it, their shields glowing with power. It was a fortress, impenetrable. Then, without warning, darkness spread across the screen. The station's defenses flickered out, the warships orbiting it twisted, engines failing, weapons going silent. And then they appeared. Black armored figures emerged from the void, walking through fire and smoke, moving with precision. Their weapons glowed with energy unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Their movements were calculated, methodical. It was not a battle, it was an execution. One of them turned toward the camera. His visor gleamed red, his voice carried through the feed. "Enough!" Then the screen went dark. A chill settled over the room. Cade exhaled, looking around at the gathered leaders. His next words were quiet, almost emotionless. "We warned you." No one spoke. For the first time in history, the galaxy was afraid. The Galactic Council chamber, once filled with arrogance and self-assured power, now stood in stunned silence. The recording had shaken them. The Phantom Armada was real. The black armored soldiers were real. And worst of all, the ones responsible, the ones they had ignored, mocked, and underestimated, were standing right in front of them. Elias Cade remained calm, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the alien leaders struggle to process the truth. The Varnak general finally broke the silence, his scaled fists clenching. This is impossible. Humanity was never this powerful." The Rilnari diplomat, her four eyes blinking rapidly, shook her head. "Your ships were outdated. Your fleets were barely a threat. You allowed us to be weak," Cade interrupted. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. Cade took a slow step forward, his expression unreadable. "Do you really think we didn't see what you were doing? The trade restrictions, the forced treaties, the sabotage technology, the constant interference in our expansion." He let the words hang in the air before continuing. "It was never about balance. It was about control. You feared what we could become, so you kept us caged." The Thalsha representative spoke next, his voice unsteady. "You signed the agreements willingly. You accepted your place. Cade's lips twitched in something that might have been amusement. We pretended to accept our place. A chill ran through the room. For centuries, humanity had been the underdog of the galaxy, the species always forced into unfair deals, always playing by rules it never wrote. But while the rest of the galaxy had laughed, humanity had been watching, waiting, preparing. The disappearances weren't random. The stations that went dark weren't accidents. The Phantom Armada hadn't appeared overnight. This was a plan. A slow, patient plan that had taken centuries to build. The Council was no longer dealing with the humans they had once dismissed. They were dealing with a species that had learned every weakness, studied every flaw, and waited for the exact moment to strike. The Thalsha representative's voice shook. "You let us believe you were weak." Cade smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was easy. You wanted to believe it. A deep silence filled the chamber. Then the alarms blared. A holographic display burst to life in the center of the room. Every leader turned toward it, and their blood ran cold. A fleet? No, the fleet. An armada of warships, dark and silent, emerging from the void itself. It stretched across the system, blocking out the stars. Ships larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Weapons glowing with energies the Council couldn't even identify. The Rilnari diplomat whispered, horror lacing her words. You can't mean to..." Cade tilted his head slightly. "What was it you always told us?" He paused, then repeated the words they had heard for centuries. "This is just business." The feed cut out, and the first shots were fired. The first shot wasn't a warning. It wasn't a demand. It was a statement. Axelari War Station, once considered indestructible, erupted into flames as the energy blast tore through its core. The explosion rippled outward, consuming every ship nearby. Debris scattered like dying stars, silent against the void. The Galactic Council watched in horror as the battle unfolded in real time. Their mightiest fleets, forces that had dominated the galaxy for centuries, were being erased. Human warships moved with terrifying precision. They didn't fight like an invading force. They fought like executioners. A Thalsha dreadnought, its shields raised, attempted to retreat. The humans didn't chase it. They simply fired a single, precise shot. The ship's core destabilized, and within seconds, it imploded in on itself. The Varnak general gritted his teeth as he watched his homeworld's defenses activate. Thousands of warships formed a wall, preparing to meet the human armada head-on. They had the numbers. They had the firepower. It didn't matter. The human fleet didn't engage directly. Instead, they deployed something new, dark, shifting drones that moved too fast for scanners to track. Within moments, the Varnak fleet's communications went silent. Their weapons powered down. Their engines died. One by one, their ships became nothing more than floating tombs. "This isn't war," the Rilnari diplomat whispered. "This is extermination." The Thalsha representative turned to Ilias Cade, his voice shaking. "Why? Why go this far? You could have taken your revenge in blood. Instead, you're unmaking us." Cade didn't answer immediately. He simply watched the battlefield, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but absolute. "You don't understand, do you?" His eyes darkened. "This isn't revenge." He turned to face them, and for the first time, they saw something worse than hatred in his gaze. Indifference. "This is a correction." A cold weight settled in the chamber. The galaxy had thought itself eternal, unshakable. The dominant species had built their empires on the backs of the weak, believing their rule would never be challenged. They had never considered what would happen if one of those weak species refused to stay in their place. Now the giants of the galaxy were falling, and humanity had already moved on. The war was over before it even began. The fleets of the great empires had been shattered. Their defenses, built over centuries, were nothing more than wreckage drifting through the void. The Galactic Council, once the untouchable rulers of the known universe, had been reduced to frightened survivors huddled in a dying system. Humanity hadn't just won. They had rewritten the rules of existence. Across the stars, entire civilizations fell silent, afraid to make a move, afraid to draw the attention of the new rulers of the galaxy. No demands came. No ultimatums were given. Humanity did not claim planets, did not ask for surrender. They simply erased those who had once stood above them. In the council chamber, now a shadow of its former self, the remaining leaders gathered, their faces pale. "This is madness," the Rilnari diplomat whispered. "They aren't expanding. They aren't taking control. They're just wiping us out." The Thalsha representative gritted his teeth. "We need to negotiate. We need to..." The chamber door was opened. Ilias Cade entered, flanked by two silent figures clad in dark armor. The air seemed to grow heavy as he stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He surveyed the room, the same room where humanity had once been mocked, dismissed, forced into submission. Now, those who had once held power sat before him, small and powerless. Finally, he spoke. There will be no negotiations. The words were a death sentence. The Varnic general slammed his fist on the table. You think you can rule this galaxy with fear? That you can destroy us and walk away? His voice shook, not with anger, but with desperation. Cade tilted his head. Who said, we want to rule? A chilling silence followed. Humanity hadn't come to conquer. They had come to end an era. For centuries, the Council had shaped the galaxy, deciding who thrived and who suffered. They had played with species like pieces on a board, ensuring humanity remained weak. But humanity had never been weak. They had been patient, and patience had run out. Cade exhaled slowly, his gaze sweeping across the room. We could have done this centuries ago, he admitted, but we wanted to see if you were capable of change. His voice dropped to something colder. You weren't. The holographic display behind him flickered to life, revealing the final phase of humanity's plan. The remaining strongholds of the old empires, planets, shipyards, hidden bases, were already under attack. The Phantom Armada was finishing what it had started. The leaders of the galaxy had already lost. They just hadn't realized it yet. Cade turned to leave, pausing at the door. Without looking back, he spoke the last words the Council would ever hear. Your time is over. Then he was gone. And the last remnants of the old galaxy crumbled into dust. The galaxy did not burn. It did not collapse into endless war, nor did it descend into chaos. It simply stopped. No more great fleets patrolled the hyperlanes. No more arrogant empires carved up space for themselves. No more treaties, no more wars, no more power struggles. Only silence remained. Humanity had not crowned itself rulers of the galaxy. No grand speeches were made, no flags planted on conquered worlds. The species that had been overlooked for centuries had simply erased those who stood in their way. And then they vanished. Across the stars, former strongholds of the fallen empires lay abandoned. Space stations that once pulsed with life drifted empty, their lights flickering in the endless dark. Cities on once mighty homeworlds remained intact, untouched, as if the people had simply disappeared. There were whispers. Survivors from the fallen civilizations spoke of dark figures moving in the void, silent sentinels watching from the shadows. They never spoke, never attacked, but their presence was enough to ensure that no new empire would ever rise. They were called the Silent Kings. No one knew where they came from, only that they were always there, watching, waiting. Any species that grew too bold, that tried to claim what had once been theirs, simply vanished. The galaxy had been reset. For the first time in recorded history, there was no war, no conflict, no council to dictate the fate of the stars, only quiet. Some believed that humanity had taken what it always wanted, freedom. That after centuries of oppression, they had removed the chains placed upon them and disappeared into the void, leaving only their silent enforcers behind. Others whispered that humanity had ascended to something greater, that they no longer played the game of mortals, that they had become something beyond understanding. But one thing was certain. The galaxy would never forget the moment humanity's patience finally snapped, and it would never dare to test them again.